So this week I'm on vacation at the beaches. You can kind of see a little bit right there. I was going to shoot this video outside where there's a better view of the beach, but they're mowing the lawn right now and it's very loud outside. But I wasn't planning on working this week, but the House of the Dragon Season 2 finale dropped the day I left for vacation. And I've rewatched all the seasons of Game of Thrones, was getting ready to do big coverage of all of this, and it happened to fall at just the wrong time, so I have to spend the very beginning of vacation shooting a couple videos. But with that said, I'm shooting this all in one take, no editing, anything like that. Just that's the compromise that happened so that I could have my thoughts on this season in a timely manner. So, if you don't know my history with Game of Thrones, I didn't watch the original show when it originally aired. I caught up on it actually during COVID lockdowns when stuff wasn't coming out. And so House of the Dragon is the first time I'm watching through Game of Thrones with the audience as it's happening week to week, sort of. Actually, I binged most of it this past week because there's been so much stuff coming out the last 6 weeks. But to some extent, I'm watching along with the audience. And it's interesting that how different of an experience it is to watch Game of Thrones and reach points in time where you get to the end of it and you have to pause and wait for something to come out. And in particular, where this season ends is the most I've kind of felt that of like, oh, wait, I have to wait 2 years to find out what's going to happen with these characters and everything going on. So that was kind of fun. Anyway, that's my background with all of this. What did I think about season 2 of House of the Dragon? So obviously at the end of the last season, it's set up that we are going to war this season. And in a lot of ways, that's exactly what it was, but not in the way that we expected. And so much of what Game of Thrones has always done well is being subversive and providing something more satisfying than what we thought we wanted, that's more interesting and clever than we would have come up with, because most of us would have been like, just all-out war happens with dragons. There's a little bit of that in here, but for the most part, the war is waged through public opinion and through alliances. To me, that was a lot of the best stuff in the season, was playing with the idea of war very differently in a way that you haven't really seen in Game of Thrones before. So you get to the end of the first episode, just so you know, spoilers, we cut off the head of a baby. Generally speaking, normal people don't think that's okay. And so then the next episode is all about how that is used by one side to spread the word that the other side is cruel and they cut the heads off of babies. And then as things kind of progress, there's a shortage of food. And so Rhaenyra and her advisors, why don't you send food over there? So while they're not taking care of people because they're struggling with it and they're feasting up in the Red Keep, you bring in food and you provide for them. And all of a sudden, tides change in the other direction. Or when the dead dragon is brought in and the fool, Cole, thinks this is a great idea. And the normal people are like, no, this is not cool. And the way that it kind of shows the shifting of public opinion and how even so much so that's paid off in the choices that people make when they're trying to recruit dragon riders and things like that, which is essentially a choice to elevate low folk into what is perceived of as something that only those chosen by the gods can do. I thought that was one of the things about this season that just stuck out to me. It's like, that's very clever. That's very interesting. Of course, the other thing you have to talk about with this season is that, every 2 episodes, maybe more often than that, something just like horrifying and shocking happens, which is pretty common to Game of Thrones, but in this season, like, you're going through stars of the show, main cast members, kings, queens that never were, and killing them, maiming them, cutting heads off of babies, like really like intense stuff that all of it is personal to the other side, or personal to one side, and elevates it. And you start having that, just escalation of personal attacks. Okay, well, you killed my son, we're gonna kill your baby. You killed our baby, we're going to war over there. And just, you see this escalation taking place, and any victory for one side, anything that you feel like you got him back, you immediately go, oh no, this is not gonna be good. And in the best possible ways, you just feel that tightening of your stomach of there's not a good answer in any of these situations. All of it is devastating on so many different levels. Other things in there is I think it's a season where it plays around with how you feel about certain characters, where like Alicent for me in season 1 is just insufferable because she's unable to take responsibility for her actions or her kids' actions. And so all she sees is red. Anything that Rhaenyra does, she just sees red. Anything that Rhaenyra's kids do, she just sees red and never goes, wait, my kids provoked this. Wait, my kids did something that escalated it, that led to something horrible, but my kids have responsibility. And so that made her just insufferable to me. And then in this season, she's in a position to where the consequences of everything that she's done are in front of her. And she realizes that she's no longer guiding her children. She's no longer even protecting her children. They've passed her. She's created a scenario where she's raised them up and they've turned into monsters. They're not good kings. They're not good rulers. They have a monstrous side. And she sees that. And some of it is the simple blow to her ego of them pushing her out. And some of it is being like, wait, you guys aren't even listening to reason. You're just waging war with and pushing out anyone that would bring any sort of sense of balance, dignity. You're just pushing them out. That's not good. And so you take a character like that insufferable, and in particular, as you move into the back half of this season, she actually starts to do everything that she needed to do in season 1, take accountability, see what her children are turning into, and starts to soften and try and do better. And some of that is, conversation early in the season where Rhaenyra comes in when we're trying to avoid war and says things to her that make it pretty clear, wait a minute, I might have been wrong about what I thought my husband said. And I mean, like, some of that is like she heard what she wanted to hear so she could believe what she wanted to believe. And her father's always been whispering into her ear all sorts of things about how dangerous Rhaenyra would be because people will never accept a queen as the ruler. So there's all sorts of things that caused her to hear what she wanted to hear from her very, very sick husband who had spent decades saying that she wanted her daughter to rule, and on his literal deathbed mumbles something that she chooses to interpret. But she hears something enough from Rhaenyra that goes, wait a minute, Rhaenyra's like convicted. Like there's a thing that she's saying that it's not just, I want to rule. There's something a deep dread that her father told her that there's more to this. That finally she hears reason, finally and they take a character I didn't care about, and still not really a fan of, but they make her much more sympathetic. She's someone that you can see the humanity starting to come through, and that she doesn't want to watch the world burn the way her kids are burning it. Now, there were quite a few things in the season that have been pretty frustrating that kind of held it back. In particular, I was like watching the final episode of like, what are we going to do here? Are we going to end on a note that makes me go, yeah? Or are we going to end on a note that makes me go, oh? And it was actually both at the same time because it was a great episode, but kind of left me on the disappointment side of things. But it plays very much like a long form setup season where the war starts, but it's all about the politics, the working the people, interpersonal connections, who's technically running the kingdom, and who will line up with who. It's kind of all of that, and it keeps setting kind of these goalposts of we're about to get to this, we're about to get to this battle, this war. Will this person get on the dragon? Will they be a dragon rider? Keep setting some of those things up right in front of you, and in particular, you start getting to the last couple episodes, and you can see it kind of coming together of, oh, that changes the tides. Rhaenyra's got her own dragon riders. She's changing the rules. They came up with this crazy plan that's outside the box, and it's gonna work to some extent. At least the experiment worked. Will the people be reliable? Obviously, we're not going to find out this season, but things start coming together, and alliances are formed. They put a goalpost right in front of you, this goalpost of, you do this in 3 days, Amen is heading over there. Okay, all right, it's about to go down, and then the season ends. And it just makes the season play like entirely set up with no payoff, which season 1 was already inherently set up for the Dance of the Dragons. And it makes this season just one more season of setup for the actual payoff that we've been waiting for. And it's frustrating because the goalpost is right there. Like it doesn't feel like it's down the line. We did all this setup. Like, okay, now the alliances have happened and these people have restored relationships, at least to some extent. Okay, but we still have to go through this, and this to get to the finale. This felt like we ended on the next to last episode. It ends at a point in time where you feel the goalpost is right there. We could get there. There's one more episode, and then the season ends and we have to wait 2 years. That's a very weird way to design your season. That's a very strange place to do the cliffhanger, because a good cliffhanger, you resolve the plot of the season. What this episode is, or this season is about, you resolve it. And then at the end of that, someone gets kidnapped and taken. And so you open a new loop. This is closed, and then you open it, we're at the start of the next one. That's not what happened. We've been working towards this one goalpost, and right before we get there, right before we get to the end point, it cuts off. That's frustrating. Also, I think this season, showed so season 1 of the show, one of the things I really appreciated about it is that it's designed in such a different way of storytelling than main Game of Thrones, where obviously there's big, gigantic time jumps between episodes. So the show covers, 20 years, something like that, maybe more than that, over the course of the season. And it's fewer characters, fewer locations, big time jumps. And so you feel like every episode is showing an iconic, important moment in the formative years of all of these characters from multiple generations. And that smaller number of characters, but with the grander sense of time, is what made it interesting and different and have a different vibe to it. So the problem I felt like you came into with season 2, and kind of a pacing issue of sorts, is that now it's running at the same story timing flow as most shows, or in this case, like Game of Thrones ran. Essentially, one episode is covering like a week at a time, something like that. Not specifically, but it's not doing big time jumps. The whole season covers like a month or 2. But we're in fewer locations. We don't have nearly as many subplots. And so there were several things where it just felt like Daemon is at this castle having bad dreams for 4 episodes straight. And we have to show him every episode, but we spend the whole season with him at this castle, away from the characters we enjoy seeing him interact with. In what felt like you normally would have done it in one episode of him, the episode where Daemon goes to the castle and he has bad dreams about the characters when they were younger, his brother, and it causes him to have to rethink everything in the wrong direction, in the right direction. Something that you would normally do in one episode, this season does it over like 4 episodes. And so most of his stuff I found pretty dull, because it was all kind of hitting the same kind of note that people there don't like him. He's too aggressive, he's not being political enough with it, and he's having these visions. And then likewise, they paid it off really great in the last 2 episodes, but all throughout the first 6 episodes, they keep cutting to the common folk of King's Landing. And this family, like, we don't have any chickens. Now we only have fish. It's very thin. We don't have any food. Or crazy drunk guys telling the tales of himself as a dragon rider. And it kind of has all this stuff going on way over there. We have stuff going on in King's Landing that's not very interesting. And it keeps going back to the same note. There's still no food. They're not feeding us. And so for the first 6 episodes, it plays as we're showing the face of the consequences of everything going on. The blockade and the way these Targaryens are handling all of this. It has terrible trickle down for the common folk. Then in the last 2 episodes, they pay it off really well. where all of a sudden, like, oh, those people, we were following them for a real specific reason, and here's what it is. And you go, oh, that was cool. That was great payoff. But what she did in the first 6 episodes was very repetitive and dull. They're still hungry. Their daughter's still sick. Oh, daughter's not sick anymore. She's gone, bye-bye. So just some things like that I think that whatever they needed to do to, whether it's a pacing issue or they needed to add a little bit more conflict that's more specific and interesting, because it was just one note. He's drunk and tells tales. Family starving. Needed more to it prior to getting to the actual payoff of their becoming dragon riders, that they truly are, they're Targaryen, they have Targaryen blood, which is a nice payoff. Other ones to talk about, like I said, I'm doing this in one take, so I do apologize for that. It is the compromise of trying to shoot this here, and I don't have my normal notes and everything that I would normally have doing this. But other kind of nice one in there, continuing just talking about Game of Thrones in a non-obvious way has very much frequently been about the underdogs, the unlikely rulers, leaders. So the original show are 3 leads. One is the sister of the supposed to be King Targaryen, who's sold into essentially sex slavery to barbarians. And then one is the bastard over here that's sent off to the wall to try and make a name for himself. And then one of them is the Tyrion, that's just viewed as this monster, this fool, drunken fool. Those are like our 3 leads, and they're the unlikely heroes that turn out to be so important. And the people that are in high positions are normally they're traded out fairly frequently. The actual king, he's not going to sit on the throne very long. It's going to be someone else pretty soon. And so then you get into this show, and you start to see that kind of once again of the Targaryens that end up sitting on the throne, the fools that right off the dragon get themselves killed, and the people that just follow these historical way of doing things get themselves in trouble. And Rhaenyra, who's the queen that is not on the throne, that was in and of itself, that's an interesting scenario that she was picked. But then her strategy is, let's raise an army of bastards. Let's turn the rules on their head. Like this, things have always been done like this. We can't do that if we're going to win this war. So let's do something else. And they go to all of these unlikely heroes, unlikely dragon riders, and very much kind of leans into that concept of these underdogs. And when you start seeing it come together, like inherently watching the show, you are not rooting for Aemon. Like, you might like them more than other characters in their own little ways. You find them enjoyable, but they're not characters that you can root for because they just come off so entitled, and they have no concern for the weight of their choices and their actions and the power that they wield across so many people. They don't care. They're unfazed by it. And so you start to see all these unlikely people that care about it, and you root for them. And this season in the final bits started to pull that together. Even a little subplot of the one girl that couldn't find a dragon, and you're rooting for her as she just wanders off into the wilderness to find a dragon. And continues to find those little moments, even though the stars of our show are the children of the king, the brother of the king, the wife of the king. They are these high people, and it still manages to find the way to make the plot about the unlikely heroes, the underdogs. So that was pretty cool. I want to be able to talk about everything in here, but like I said, I need to stop apologizing for being on vacation and still doing work on vacation. So overall, I thought it was a good season that wasn't fully a great season. It had all the great things I wanted. And when things happened, episode 4, when we have too many names that sound like Rhaenyra, but the queen who never was, rides in, it's plays so good. And it's frustrating because we know as the audience that they've played into a trap, but then because the King's Landing crew are so backbiting and manipulative towards each other, it all still kind of falls apart because dummy the king flies in drunk. And so you still you have this scenario where you lose someone that you really love. And you're watching it like you don't want her to suffer, you don't want her dragon to suffer, but they get this great victory that in many ways is the better victory. It's not just that they won the battle, it's that they did something that shook everything. The king went down. And in a way that's almost the more frustrating version of it, he's not dead. He doesn't die, but we know that dragons can die and kings can fall, and creates that between these brothers trying to get who's in charge of the throne, causes even more trouble. You have these great moments and these great bits. And then some other things that I think were plot lines that just played out for too long, where it doesn't feel like they fully figured out how to do the pacing of this show that has a smaller cast, it has fewer locations, but it no longer has the time jumps to make that work a little bit better. So it feels like just the wrong average in this season of House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones pacing and storytelling. And hopefully they can iron out some of those kinks by the time we get to the next season. Just trying to think through any more plot lines I want to make sure I want to say at least a little bit of something about. I found it in the plot line with Rhaenyra's son, I found it to be interesting. I kind of want to know where they're going with it, because he starts off as someone that you kind of like, that he's stepping into this leadership, has a dignity to him. And then he has like he's challenging his mother, he's frustrated by her, but he's putting ideas out there. And then she takes his idea and goes somewhere else with it. And he's thinking, let's get these highborn kind of Targaryens. And she goes, let's get the lowborn actual Targaryens. And he is deeply offended by this because he himself is a bastard, but he's one that has been pretending not to be. Everyone knows what's going on here, but he's pretending not to be. So that was like one of those like little fun like watching that interaction. Like it made me so frustrated with him, and at the same time you can understand just enough like that insecurity that what she's done has created. But you want him to have sympathy for them. You want him to have this mindset of I've been able to live a life of privilege when I could have ended up living in poverty like them. You want him to see that, and instead you get kind of the flip side to it of he's vindictive towards them. You're like, will he come around? But it's so much of the last section of the season is about the bastards that are out there that it's kind of a nice, interesting little touch the way they did all of that. So, all right, anyway, I've already over 20 minutes. That's what we're gonna do. I've got a ranking of the Game of Thrones seasons. I actually shot 90% of it back home before I left here, and then I'm gonna shoot the House of the Dragon season 2 part now and actually figure out there's the section there. Some of it I knew what it was gonna land on, and then there's a section which ones I still have to figure out. But hey, thank you guys so much for watching. Talk about it down below. Keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.